The announcement board flickered above the crowded station, letters glitching into place, the sound of steel wheels screaming against the tracks drowning half the announcements. People pushed past, briefcases hitting shoulders, bags dragging against the tiled floor, voices clashing into a dull roar. She stood perfectly still. Her hands clutched a small suitcase, worn leather, edges frayed, the brass lock barely holding. A thin red scarf curled from its zipper like a secret trying to escape. The fabric trembled in the draft every time the station doors opened, brushing lightly against her fingers, as if reminding her not to forget. Her eyes followed the stream of strangers, tired men with gray coats, students gripping headphones, mothers with restless children. But she wasn't watching them. She was searching, scanning through faces with a kind of sharp, silent hunger. The kind of gaze that could cut glass. She whispered under her breath, barely audible, "Not this time." The words dissolved into the air, lost to the crowd. A man bumped her shoulder, muttered an apology without looking. Her suitcase tilted and thudded against her leg. She tightened her grip until her knuckles went pale. Her pulse raced so hard it felt as if the veins in her wrist would burst through her skin. She checked the watch strapped to her left arm. The glass was cracked, splintering the reflection of the station lights into fractured stars. It had stopped ticking months ago, but she wore it anyway. Time, for her, had broken the moment he took something that wasn't his. Her throat burned with the memory of applause, of faces turning toward him when they should have turned toward her. His smug half-smile. His voice stealing her words, her ideas, her work. She swallowed hard, the station air thick with metallic dust and perfume, and pressed her palm flat over the cracked watch as though it could steady her. A train screeched to a halt. Doors hissed open. A fresh rush of wind lifted her hair across her cheek, strands catching against her lips. She didn't move them away. She only stared into the flood of passengers spilling onto the platform. And then she saw him. Farther down the line, taller than most, his suit pressed too sharply, as if the fabric itself knew it didn't belong to him. His laughter carried faintly over the chaos, loud, careless, untouched. Her jaw locked. For a second, she thought her knees might give out. Instead, she shifted the suitcase handle higher into her palm, the red scarf swinging with the motion like a signal flag. The crowd pressed forward, swallowing him, spitting him back out, and she stepped once into the moving tide. Her voice was only in her head this time, "Wait until you see what happens next." The station clock ticked above her head, though her own watch stayed frozen. She leaned against the cold pillar, suitcase balanced against her shin, the red scarf trailing across her fingers like a restless memory. The crowd shifted, families pulling each other close, lovers falling into quick embraces, children darting between legs. She watched it all quietly, her mouth tightening. Everyone seemed to have someone waiting for them. Everyone but her. Her eyes fell on a little boy hugging his father's waist. The man dropped his suitcase with a careless thud, bending down to press his cheek against the boy's hair. The sight pierced through her. She remembered a softer voice, years ago, murmuring at her bedside, "You don't need to shout to be heard. Just build something they can't ignore." Her father's voice. He had handed her this very suitcase the day she left for university. It was old even then, the lock stiff, the leather already worn. He had tapped the brass latch with his thumb and said, "This has carried more than clothes. It carries stories." And now it carried the weight of betrayal. She closed her eyes. She could still see the boardroom, fluorescent lights buzzing above, the scent of burnt coffee and old carpet. Her slides, her project, her long nights. And him, his voice smooth, his smile confident, as he lifted her words and let them fall from his lips as though they'd been born there. Applause that should have warmed her chest had struck her like cold water. She had clapped for him too, because what else could she do? Her throat ached. She wanted to scream even now, standing here in the station, but instead she swallowed and looked around. That was when she noticed him. Not him, not the thief in the pressed suit. Someone else. Across the platform, half hidden in the shadows near the vending machine, a stranger leaned with quiet stillness. His hands were in his pockets, posture relaxed, but his eyes, they were fixed on her. He didn't look away when she caught him staring. Not once. His gaze wasn't curious, it was intentional, as if he knew something. Her stomach twisted. She shifted, pulling the red scarf tighter around her hand, as if it could shield her. The scarf had been her mother's. Once vibrant, now dulled at the edges, it was the only soft thing she had kept through all the cold years. Another announcement crackled overhead. A delay. The crowd groaned, impatient, but she felt only the weight of time stretching thinner, pulling at her nerves. She lifted her suitcase to move, but paused. From the corner of her eye, the stranger offered the faintest smile, not warm, not mocking. Something in between. Her grip froze on the handle. Her chest tightened. For the first time since she entered the station, she hesitated. The station lights flickered as the storm pressed closer. A low rumble of thunder rolled somewhere beyond the glass ceiling, a warning buried in the night air. The crowd had thinned, but she stayed rooted near the pillar, suitcase balanced against her knee, scarf coiled in her fist like a tether. The stranger hadn't moved. She stole glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking. But he always was. His stillness unsettled her. It wasn't predatory, not careless either. It was deliberate. When another gust of wind rattled the station doors, he shifted. The movement was small, but she noticed. His shoes, worn leather, scuffed at the edges, soles nearly thinning through. They didn't match the pressed coat he wore. Her breath caught when he pulled something from his pocket. Not a phone, not a wallet. A photo. Folded at the corners, creased from years of being touched too often. He looked at it only briefly before sliding it back inside, his thumb lingering over the fabric as though it might disappear if he let go. Her chest tightened. She didn't need to see the picture to know what it meant. Loss. The storm outside cracked, lightning flashing through the wide glass, thunder following hard and impatient. The sound stirred the scarf in her hand, whipped it across her wrist like a reminder, you're not the only one carrying ghosts. But she hated that thought. Her betrayal was hers. Her war was hers. The scars of being unseen, unheard, stolen from, those belonged only to her. And yet, watching the stranger, she felt her anger soften against her will. Her own reflection blinked back at her in the darkened glass of the vending machine behind him. She saw herself not as she wanted to be, but as she was, tired, wounded, still clutching things that had long since broken. An invisible mirror between them. The announcement board glitched again, her train number flashing red, then disappearing. Delayed. Another stretch of time to wrestle with the storm inside her. Her body told her to move. To leave. To put distance between herself and anyone who might hold another secret, another knife in their sleeve. But her eyes betrayed her. They kept finding him. Why wasn't he approaching? Why wasn't he looking away? Her suitcase handle dug into her palm. She thought of the man who stole her work, how easy it had been for him to take everything she bled for. And here was another man, silent, unreadable, waiting for something she couldn't name. Fate or manipulation? The storm broke fully now, rain hammering against the station roof, drowning the crowd's complaints. She took a single step forward. He did the same. And in the thunder's echo, the distance between them stayed unanswered. The rain outside beat harder, its rhythm leaking into the station like a second heartbeat. Umbrellas shook, water pooling on the tiles, shoes squeaking against the floor. She stood near the departure gate, suitcase at her side, scarf twisted tight in her hand as though it were the only thing anchoring her. Her chest rose too quickly, each breath a fight. She wanted to move, leave, vanish into the blur of strangers, but her feet refused. The stranger hadn't spoken, hadn't moved closer, but his presence was like a thread pulled taut between them, humming with unasked questions. She clenched the suitcase handle until her arm trembled. Just go, she told herself. Go before he becomes another weight you can't carry. She lifted the suitcase, took 2 steps toward the exit, and then froze. Something inside her cracked. Not loudly, not visible, but deep, a fissure she could no longer hide. Her throat burned, her eyes stung. She turned back, just once, just to look at him again. And that was when she saw it. The scarf. It wasn't in her hand anymore. She hadn't noticed when it slipped, but now it lay across his fingers. He held it carefully, not like an object, but like a fragile truth. His thumb traced the fabric slowly, reverently, as if he understood that it was more than cloth. Her pulse faltered. Across the thinning crowd, she heard whispers. A woman nudged her partner, eyes darting between them. A man clearing his throat gave her a glance sharp with judgment, as if strangers could already decide her story. She felt the weight of their silence, their verdicts, how easily people build entire truths from what they do not know. The scarf fluttered between his fingers as the storm pushed another gust through the doors. He looked up at her, and finally, his voice cut through the noise. Some people carry more than just bags. His tone was low, rough at the edges, as if unused for too long. They carry silence. Her lips parted but no sound came. The word struck too close. Silence had been her prison, years of it, in meetings where her voice was stolen, in rooms where no one cared enough to hear. And now here he was, holding her silence in his hands. She wanted to step closer. She wanted to rip the scarf back. She wanted to scream, to ask who he was, what he wanted, why he stood like a shadow that knew too much. But she did none of those things. Instead, she stood trembling, the red fabric swaying like a question between them, the station lights flickering above, judgmental eyes watching from all sides. And for one fragile moment, the world narrowed into nothing but her and him, unanswered, unfinished, unbearably human. The scarf lingered in his hand, rainwater dripping from the edges where it had brushed the wet tiles. She stepped forward at last, her fingers twitching as if to claim it back, but something in his eyes held her still. Not pity. Not curiosity. Something deeper. He folded the scarf carefully, almost reverently, before extending it toward her. She hesitated, then took it, her hand brushing his. His skin was colder than she expected, like he'd been standing in the storm itself. "Why are you?" she started, but her words faltered as he slid something else from his coat pocket. A folded document, damp at the corners. He didn't hand it to her, just let it rest between his fingers long enough for her to catch the company logo stamped at the top. Her breath caught. It was her company. The one where she had clawed her way through applications, interviews, endless rejection. The one where she had bled ideas that were stolen by men like the one in the pressed suit. She looked back at him, suddenly unable to breathe. "You," her voice cracked. "You're not," he didn't answer. His silence confirmed what her gut already screamed, this man wasn't a passerby. He wasn't even just another businessman. He was him. The owner. The man whose shadow stretched over everything she had fought to stand beneath. Her suitcase wobbled in her grip. The cracked watch on her wrist caught the station light, splintering it into broken stars across her skin. "Time," her father's voice whispered again, "build something they can't ignore." And then another echo, the stranger's words, just minutes ago. Some people carry more than just bags. They carry silence. She stared at the scarf, trembling in her hands. It wasn't only hers anymore. His gaze told her the truth before he spoke it. "It belonged to my daughter," he said softly. The air left her lungs. The scarf, the one her mother had given her, the one she thought was only hers, suddenly wasn't a symbol of her solitude, but of someone else's absence. She gripped it harder, as though by holding on she could keep both their ghosts from slipping away. No return. Not after this. She couldn't unknow him. She couldn't unhear those words. The line between her silence and his grief blurred until it was the same wound bleeding through different lives. The loudspeaker cracked overhead. Her train, final call. She lifted her suitcase, but instead of moving toward the platform, she turned. One step. Then another. The stranger followed. The door at the end of the station corridor loomed open, light spilling out like an unmade choice. And she walked into it. The storm had quieted by the time she reached the end of the corridor. Water dripped from the ceiling, echoing against the tiles like a metronome. The door ahead glowed faintly, humming with the promise of something irreversible. Her suitcase felt heavier now. Not from what it carried, but from what it meant. The red scarf was wrapped around the handle, its threads darker with rain, its weight no longer just hers to bear. She turned. He was there. Closed now, his steps soundless, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them stretched until it became its own language. Then, finally, he broke it. You remind me of her. Her throat tightened. She didn't have to ask who. The scarf had already answered. He pulled the folded document from his coat again, but this time, he offered it fully. Her name was there, on the page, in black ink, next to the word promotion. A position she had dreamed of, fought for, bled for. But the ink carried his signature. His choice. Her pulse thundered louder than the rain outside. Why? She whispered. Why me? His eyes softened, but not with affection, more with resignation. Because you don't just fight. You carry silence. And you survive it. Her hand trembled as she took the paper. Her father's voice returned, woven now with his, build something they can't ignore. She realized she had. But the cost was unbearable. She glanced down at the scarf. Slowly, she lifted it from her suitcase handle, smoothing the rain-creased fabric in her palms. She wanted to keep it, selfishly, desperately. But when she looked up, she saw his gaze locked on it, his chest rising just slightly faster. Her decision was sudden, fierce. She stepped closer, pressing the scarf back into his hands. It isn't mine anymore, she said, voice breaking. Some things, they belong where they began. He looked at her, startled, the fabric trembling between his fingers. For the first time, his composure cracked. A man who had carried empires now stood holding a single piece of cloth as though it outweighed the world. The station announcement blared behind them, her train, final boarding. A different final call. She turned, lifting her suitcase, her cracked watch catching the light one last time. It no longer felt broken. Time hadn't stopped. It had carried her here. As she walked toward the platform, the crowd shifted around her. People stared, some curious, some judging, but their eyes no longer mattered. The silence she once carried like a wound now felt like a shield. Behind her, the scarf fluttered in his hands, catching the faint draft from the open doors. She didn't look back. Not every stranger you help is meant to stay, but some leave you changed forever. The train moved like a whisper through the night, the city lights dissolving into blurred streaks beyond the glass. She sat by the window, suitcase tucked against her leg, hands folded loosely in her lap. Her reflection wavered on the glass, tired eyes, damp hair, but something steadier beneath it all. For the first time in years, she wasn't rushing towards something or away from someone. She was simply here. Breathing. Existing. The cracked watch on her wrist caught the dim carriage light. She turned it gently, the fractured glass scattering faint glimmers across her skin. Once, it had felt like a reminder of what was broken. Tonight, it felt more like proof she had survived. Her fingers brushed the edge of the empty space beside her. No scarf. No stranger. Only silence, her silence, now softer, no longer heavy. She leaned her forehead against the glass, eyes half closed, and heard her father's voice again. Sometimes love is not romance, it's recognition. She let the words settle into her chest. Recognition was what she had craved all along. And maybe, in an unexpected way, she had found it, not through applause, not through stolen credit, but through being seen in her silence. When the train slowed into the next station, she stepped off into cool air. The platform was nearly empty, just the faint sound of footsteps echoing down the tunnel. She adjusted her grip on the suitcase and walked toward the exit. Later, in a small rented room with peeling wallpaper, she placed the suitcase by the bed. The scarf was gone, but she didn't reach for it. Instead, she opened the drawer of the wooden nightstand. Inside, she placed the cracked watch, face upward, under the faint glow of a bedside lamp. The drawer shut with a soft click. She lay back on the bed, eyes tracing the water stains on the ceiling. Outside, rain still pattered lightly against the glass, but it no longer sounded like thunder, only like the steady breathing of the world. Her life was still uncertain. Tomorrow could bring struggle, another betrayal, another silence to carry. But tonight, she allowed herself the fragile peace of having walked through a storm and come out with something unbroken inside her. She exhaled slowly, almost smiling. Not every story needed to end with victory or defeat. Some ended with a mirror, held briefly by a stranger, reminding you of who you had been all along. And maybe that was enough. Because sometimes the people we meet don't stay, but their absence leaves a shape we never forget.